Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you are new here, welcome to my kitchen. I have a great video for you today. I'm going to share with you some easy meal ideas that use only shelf-stable ingredients. You heard that right. These are all meals that are made from non-perishable items that you can store in your pantry, so stay tuned. Okay, you guys, I've actually had the idea for this video for months now. Back in February, about 6 or 7 months ago, we had a winter weather event in Oklahoma. It was an historical event, not like anything that we have had in recent years before. We had a couple of weeks of not just sub-freezing temperatures, but temperatures in the single digits and in the negatives, along with a few rounds of ice and snow. And that may seem like winter business as usual to some of my northern friends, but here in this part of the country, we just aren't equipped for that kind of weather. And several people lost power, some of them for days at a time. We were actually very fortunate that we only lost power for a few hours at a time while they were instigating rolling outages in our area in order to keep the grid from crashing. And it just made me think about all of the other instances where I have been in an urgent situation or a semi-emergency situation, or could have been, and how prepared am I and how prepared is my family for that. And of course, the events of the past year and a half or so have certainly made me think about that as well. So during that short time this winter when we were without power, we fortunately have a gas stove, and we were able to very carefully manually light that stove so that we could prepare some breakfast, have a little coffee. We also have a gas grill outside. I know lots of people have camp stoves that they were utilizing during that time outside in order to try to prepare some meals for their family. And it just got me to thinking, what would I be able to cook or prepare if I only had non-perishable items and a heat source? So basically, if I could not rely on my refrigerator or my freezer, what could I make? And there might be lots of ways that these kinds of meals could come in handy. Maybe even not in an emergency situation, but maybe something we could pack if we were going camping, or maybe something that we could take somewhere with us where we were gonna be in a remote area, maybe on vacation where there weren't gonna be a lot of grocery options. So I just kind of like the idea of trying to challenge myself to come up with some meals that were nourishing, that were easy, and that we could eat if we only had a heat source and we didn't have a way to refrigerate or preserve any of our food. So let me just tell you right from the get-go here, and I'm sure you've already figured this out, if we're talking about shelf-stable items, I'm talking about things in cans, in boxes, or in bags that live in my pantry. So some of these items are going to be processed foods or be pre-seasoned foods, packaged foods. I'm not worried about that for this challenge. I'm really just trying to think of meals that would get us through either a difficult time or just a short amount of time when we couldn't rely on refrigeration and only had a heat source to prepare our food. So let's get into the video, and I'll show you some of the ideas that I came up with, and some of these were things that I even prepared for my family or have prepared for my family in the past. The first recipe that I'm going to share with you is a chicken noodle soup that I made last week. It was perfect timing because I came down with a little sinus infection and wasn't feeling well for a few days, and this soup was so good. It turned out so much better than I thought it would, and I used only shelf-stable ingredients. I usually use a recipe from Paula Deen called the Ladies Chicken Noodle Soup whenever I am making homemade chicken noodle soup. So I was trying to kind of model this recipe after that recipe, but using only shelf-stable ingredients. So these are the ingredients I use to make it, plus some water. I have a bag of egg noodles, a can of chicken breast, a can of sliced carrots. I'm going to use 1 bouillon cube, a packet of Italian dressing mix, and the secret ingredient that I decided to add just to give it a little bit of a creamy texture is a can of table cream. And I find that in the Hispanic food section in my grocery store. I also considered whether or not I wanted to use gnocchi instead of egg noodles, because gnocchi is shelf stable in these vacuum sealed packages for a little while, but I just went with the egg noodles in the end. So I'm just combining my canned chicken, my can of sliced carrots, 1 of my bouillon cubes, and also my packet of seasoning mix. And I used about 8 to 10 cups of water, and I actually came back and added a little more water later on, which you'll see in a minute. I decided to go with packet seasonings for this because I just thought it would be easier to store. And when I look at the back of the seasoning packets, a lot of these seasonings are things I would use in my regular chicken noodle soup recipe. I also thought using a seasoning packet instead of relying on my own seasonings would make it possible for me to maybe share these with a friend if necessary, because you'll see how I'm storing them later. I went ahead and brought my broth mixture to a boil. I added my my noodles to it, and that's when I realized that I needed more water. Now here is my table cream, and table cream is not condensed sweetened milk. It is basically kind of like evaporated milk, except half and half instead of milk. I mean, it's basically canned half and half. It's got a little higher fat content than evaporated milk. And since I'm using mostly low fat or no fat ingredients in this, I just really wanted that kind of creamy texture to this chicken noodle soup, and I knew that the fat in the table cream would add like some flavor and also make the chicken noodle soup a little more satisfying. So after my noodles were done cooking in the chicken and the broth mixture, I just stirred in my table cream, and this is what it looked like. It smelled fantastic. It tasted fantastic. It was so good. Another option you could add to this is a little bit of Parmesan cheese. When I make the ladies chicken noodle soup, it calls for grated Parmesan cheese. And in the canister, if it's unopened, you can actually store this in the pantry for a little while. Of course, after the canister's open, it has to go in the fridge. So another option might be some of these Parmesan packets that I almost always have lying around from like pizza or takeout places. So I threw a couple of those in the bag too, so I could sprinkle a little bit of that on my soup if I thought it needed it. But this turned out really great. I'm very glad that I added the table cream to it. You could leave that out if you wanted, you don't need it, but it just gave it this like really rich, satisfying flavor. And like I said, I ate this for several days. I was sick at the time that I made it, and it just really hit the spot. It was so good. I was really pleased with how this turned out. One of the meals that I plan to store the ingredients for is my Aunt Barb's mostaccioli, or kind of a simplified version of that. I actually featured this recipe in a video I made last Thanksgiving about feeding a crowd, because it was something that my aunt used to make when she needed to feed a lot of people because it stretched really far. I will be sure to leave that recipe linked in the description box if you want to learn more about it. The adjustments that I'm making to it are just that I'm going to leave out the ground beef because obviously that's not perishable, but I think that the recipe stands on its own without it. And I'm going to use a packet seasoning because sometimes it's easier when you're, in a bind to just, use a packet seasoning. So the ingredients for this recipe that I'm storing are 1 can of diced tomatoes, 1 can of tomato soup, and 1 can of tomato sauce, plus a can of chili. You bring that to a simmer with the seasoning, and then you just go ahead and cook your pasta in the sauce. The chili is sort of the secret ingredient just because it gives it kind of a little bit of a different flavor. And by the way, I cut this recipe in half. So what I am storing is only half of my Aunt Barb's recipe. She would have doubled all of these ingredients plus added a pound of ground beef. I just got a packet of spaghetti sauce mix because when I look on the back of it, a lot of the seasonings that are in this, oregano, paprika, crushed red pepper, garlic, onion, are things that I would use to season this kind of dish anyway. But I also picked up this packet mix because it's called garlic parmesan, and even though it says it's wing seasoning mix and has wings on the package, that doesn't mean that's what I have to use it for. And when I look at the ingredients on the back of the package, a lot of these spices are things I would use for this style of dish too. So this is a really easy one pot meal that I can make using one pot. And to go along with that, I would probably just serve it with some vegetables, maybe some canned green beans or some mixed vegetables like this. So I'll throw those into the bag as well that will go into the pantry for this meal. Now for this video, I pretty much exclusively shopped at Walmart. Everything that I purchased for this, I purchased at Walmart. And I was kind of thinking, I probably could put together some options from Dollar Tree, some options with items that I purchased at Aldi. So if you are interested in seeing another video like this with some ideas for meals made from shelf-stable ingredients, maybe from another store, leave me a comment and I will be sure to see what I can come up with. If you you are looking for a few non-perishable meal ideas that are even easier than the ones that I've already shared, here's a couple of ideas for you. Some of these are things that I actually used to eat back in college. They were things that came together really quickly with pretty cheap ingredients, so there might be something here too that would be useful to somebody. Okay, so this right here was something that my mom used to do when we were kids to stretch a can of soup. I mean, it says that there's 2.5 servings in here, but let's face it. I mean, how many of us only eat like half a can of condensed soup whenever we make it? Even as a kid, like I could polish off one of these by myself. One of the things that she would do is take a can of condensed soup like this and add about 1.5 cans of water and a brick of ramen. And I have continued to make this. I used to make this all the time when I was in high school and college. It was a quick, easy, cheap meal that stretched really far and could even feed 2 of us, or I could have it and have leftovers. Sometimes I would put the seasoning packet in, sometimes I would not. I typically did this with vegetable beef soup. This is just a plain, vegetable soup that already has some noodles in it. But this is another, really easy, quick meal that would come together with nothing more than a heat source and some water. And obviously this would keep in the pantry for a really long time. So there's an idea for you. This plus these plus this equals a meal that I used to make myself a lot when I was in college and in my first days of teaching when I was engaged before I got married. This right here would be 2 servings for me. Obviously, I could double up on a couple of these ingredients to make it stretch farther. And these noodles are great as a non-perishable item for a quick meal, in my opinion, because they're pre-seasoned. I know a lot of people don't like that, but again, we're talking about, a meal that I might use in an emergency situation. Now, even though a lot of times these call for butter or even milk, I have made these before with just water, but I am actually going to include in the bag I'm storing these in a can of evaporated milk. This is not sweetened condensed milk, it is evaporated milk. So this is essentially milk that you could add water to it in a 1-to-1 ratio and it would be a similar consistency and taste to milk. And that might add just a little bit more flavor and richness to this. I've used different kinds of noodles in this depending on just what I was feeling during the time. You could use, canned chicken or some other kind of canned meat. If you wanted to, you could use a different kind of vegetables. I just kind of like the vegetable medley because it gives some variety to it. But super easy meal that was not, gourmet or even the best, most amazing thing I've ever eaten, but it certainly got me through in a pinch. Oatmeal is something that I really discovered later in life. I didn't eat a lot of oatmeal growing up. I don't know why. And it wasn't something that I started eating really until the last probably 5 or 6 years. I've already shared with you, that I'm storing some oats with some ingredients that I could use to make a big pot of oatmeal or some kind of baked oatmeal or something like that as a family meal. Instant oatmeal is a good option too. And I use this all the time. And I can make this on the stove. I can make it in the microwave. I have even used the coffee maker to make this before by just making hot water. You can make overnight oats with this if you happen to have a refrigeration source, or if you're using water, you might even be able to just let them sit on the counter until they soak up the moisture. But this is something obviously I can add stuff to if I need to, and just these travel really easily. I used to put these in my purse and just take them with me. Like if we were traveling or if I was traveling for work, if I was, taking students to Allstate or something like that, I would take these to the hotel room with me because like I said, I can use the coffee maker to make myself a bowl of oatmeal. So there's another option for you that's super easy. All right, you guys, that's what I have for you today. I hope that was helpful or gave some ideas or some inspiration. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be sure to check in with another video very soon.